marry Mary is quite contrary to Protestants, and Marian teaching is often the doctrines that are first attacked and usually the last objections to be overcome. And why? Why is it such a problem for Protestants to accept Marian teaching? Well, really two. One is when they look at Scripture, especially the New Testament, they don't see a lot about Mary being taught in the pages. And they also see certain passages that seem to contradict the Catholic Church's teaching on Mary. Over the years, I've been able to help Protestants see the biblical roots, the biblical logic behind Marian teaching. But what I found is something interesting. Usually when they accept it, these ideas kind of hang out in the middle of nowhere. Almost like some interesting biblical factoids, but they don't really impact the way they view Christianity as a whole. And I believe Catholics kind of labor under the same problem. I know for me, before I even began studying about the Church, I always believed all Marian teaching, everything the Catholic Church proposed. But I must say, I never really understand how it all fit together. It seemed as if these Marian faiths and teachings were add-ons to the gospel. They didn't really fully integrate with the story of redemption. At least I couldn't see it. And I think a lot of Catholics today have that same problem. We believe Marian teaching, we see the biblical rationale of it, but how it all fits together sometimes is a little hard to explain. So in this CD on Mary, and also in my book, Making Sense of Mary, what I do is I provide a biblical and patristic structure in which you can see how all these doctrines fit together most perfectly. So that Mary doesn't compete with Christ in any way, but really Mary manifests God's love for us and His glory in a very special way. So the first thing we do is we look at redemption. Now, to understand redemption, you have to understand what we are redeemed from. So we begin with the fall, and we look at the fall. After all, the early Christians who were Jewish, if they wanted to understand what Jesus did in terms of redemption, they didn't go to the New Testament, it wasn't written yet. They went to the Old Testament. So we go to the fall, and we look at the fall of Adam from a very interesting perspective. We look at it from the perspective of the serpent. And we look at the malevolent logic involved in how the serpent brought about the fall of humanity and the consequences of that fall. Then, using that, we look at redemption with fresh eyes, and we see how God's perfect plan of redemption is made possible not only through Christ, who is the Redeemer, who alone redeems us, but also Mary's involved in a unique role. In fact, if your theology doesn't hold on to certain Marian teachings, there is a sense where God's perfect plan of redemption isn't perfect. It's somewhat insufficient. So we look at that, and we look at Mary as New Eve in a way probably you never heard before. Next, we look at certain Old Testament texts and institutions that also shed light on Mary. And one institution, for example, is the Queen Mother for the Davidic monarchy and her function in dynastic succession. And from that, we look at Mary and we see how the Annunciation takes on a whole new importance that perhaps you never considered before. Then finally, we look at one of those really mysterious passages in Scripture from the most mysterious book in the New Testament, the book of Revelation, chapter 12. And I argue that the woman of chapter 12 is Mary. And I would say perhaps Mary exclusively. And I give some arguments why I believe it could only be Mary and not on any other symbol or something like that. And more importantly, what does Revelation 12 teach us about Mary? And again, I think a lot of this would probably be things that you probably haven't read before or heard before. So I love this set on Mary, and I hope that by listening to it, you'll gain a much more deeper biblical and profound appreciation for what God has done through Mary.